All right, show me the money. NFL picks for week 13 are here. Thanksgiving is done and dusted. We are getting ready for the stretch run the NFL. Join me today to do some picks. The host of the Sports in the Waiting Room podcast, Christopher Russo, is here. Chris, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, Mike. I appreciate you having me back on.
Yeah, a lot of fun. We talked some hockey last month, and I will say your Rangers prediction about how the depth signings will be better for them than big names seems to be working out so far.
Yeah, it seems that way. I didn't think the Devils would fall off as probably as far as they did, and the Islanders are staying about the same. So seems interesting so far. I mean, well, as we're recording this last night, they got just ridden out by Buffalo, but that was also bound to happen at some point. So yeah, it's interesting for the local teams.
Yeah, I think the Buffalo one I could have seen coming, especially when they had that big emotional win over Boston on Saturday, like which is the other best team in the Eastern Conference. I could see them having a little letdown.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Well, the interesting thing about the Buffalo game too is that I think that there's the Blake Wheeler goal that got taken back because it was officially a hand pass. It was kind of elbowed toward the front by Will Cooley, and yeah, a couple of ticky tack calls going each way, and then Buffalo just exploded for three late, and so it was a much closer game than the score indicates. But what's also interesting is that Buffalo was out without Tage Thompson, so that was a big one.
A big one for them. Plus, you're a Rangers fan here. This big run here. I mean, no Adam Fox or 10 games of it. No Filipino for a while. They had Shesterkin missed some time with stuff. So, like, they're winning without those guys being big contributors to this run. I think is very impressive.
Yeah, well, I think the important thing for me, broadcaster, I'm not rooting for anybody, but it is important. I think I work for a local team. It is important to see the local hockey teams do well for just for growing the sport in the area. But
Yeah.
it is really interesting without Fox, without Heedle. They were without Shesterkin for a brief time. That was quite something to watch. Yeah, and then apparently after last night, perhaps without Capo Caco for a while, and it was an interesting play in the corner. And yeah, they've been a little injury prone at times, but it's that's bounced around the league. It's not as much as I would say starting quarterbacks right now though.
Oh no, great transition by the way.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get back to the phone, which is why a lot of people are listening to this part of the podcast. Let's talk about the New York teams here and Giants. And we talked a couple weeks ago about doing this, and like they have not really been interesting here, but they won 2 in a row, which basically has destroyed their draft positioning here. So, like, what's your observation here of these 2 wins you've seen from the Giants over the last 2 weeks?
Well, what's funny is I had something ready for this, and then I kind of had to alter it. I have to alter it in my mind a little bit this morning because we're recording this on a Tuesday, and last night was Bears Vikings Monday Night Football. And if you're a Giant fan, you actually wanted the Bears for 2 reasons. One, because the Bears, having won, are now 4-8. It's the same record as the Giants. Of course, the Bears have 2 picks anyway because they have Carolina's pick. But also, in terms of playoff positioning, the Vikings dropped from 6-5 to 6-6. So believe it or not, the Giants are actually closer to a playoff spot than they are to the number 1 pick right now. The Vikings are the last spot at 6-6. The Bears are at 4-8. The Panthers are down to 1-10. So the Giants are 2 games out of a playoff spot and 2.5 ahead of the Panthers for the number 1 pick. But yeah, these 2 games I think really hurt them. In my opinion, now with a 17-game season, mathematically, once you get to 8 losses, that's the point where I think, look, I'm not a huge fan of the idea of trying to tank, but at that point, no 8-loss team has ever won the Super Bowl. That's kind of the important thing right there. And to have to go through potentially San Francisco and Philadelphia and et cetera, it's wild. You look at the Giants, I think they're actually a pretty good defensive team, and their weapons aren't awful. I think that was indicated by, look at Jalen Hyatt had a 100+ yard game finally for the Giants, really breaking out. And Tommy DeVito, I think actually could be a good backup in this league. Maybe better. You never know. But they have ruined their draft position. I think the truth is, if they drop to 6 or 7, I don't think they're that. I don't think they're in that bad a position anyway, because what they need more than anything, what they've needed for probably 11 years, something like that, pretty much since they last won the Super Bowl, was a good offensive line. That's the one thing that's killed them consistently. And, it looks like it's going to be Caleb Williams, Marvin Harrison, Drake May, I guess. It's going to be quarterbacks and receivers, top 3 or 4. I don't think it's the worst thing for the Giants if they end up at 5, 6, 7, whatever, and pick somebody like Joe Alt from Notre Dame. But, it's they've said that Joe Shane said that Daniel Jones is going to be the starter next year. I think my brother's actually the one who probably said it best. He said, I think he's kind of just worn down from playing behind that line for so long. And I think I think it's time really to move on a little bit from Jones. But, on the other end, he also has not been helped aside from Andrew Thomas when he's healthy and John Michael Schmitz up the middle.
Yeah, for sure here. And you brought the playoff angle up here. I did think it's interesting here. Now I put this on the screen here in terms of the Giant playoff situation here. I've got the NFC playoff picture here, which is very mediocre as you got the top five because Seattle's 6-5, they're the 6th seed. Minnesota is 6-6, they're the 7th seed. You look at the rest of the field here. Green Bay, LA, and the Saints are all 5-6. Tampa's 4-7. Then the Giants right there, 4-8. They're 2 out, and they have 1, 2, 3 of these teams still on their schedule ahead of them. So, like, even though they're 4-8, you can still dream about, hey, like, miracle playoff run is possible.
It is bizarre. I mean, the truth is, if there's no realistic chance of winning the Super Bowl, it's kind of tough for any given fan to root for that team, considering you'd have to do something that had never been done before, go 9-8 and win the Super Bowl. But yeah, it's true. They do play the Packers. That'll be at MetLife. It'll be a Monday night game. There might actually be a decent fan turnout after all of that. They play the Rams. That'll also be at MetLife. They play the Saints on the road. Derek Carr has been iffy. The Saints have been iffy. Honestly, the conference is just not that good. Even the Niners had that 3-game losing streak, and even the Eagles probably should have lost to Washington twice, and they even should have blown that game with Dallas. And Dallas has had its downsides. The NFL is so strange this season in particular, but any of the last few years. You look at the AFC, Cincinnati became weird even before Burrow was there. But yeah, the Giants could theoretically make it. You look at the Vikings, even they're playing with Josh Dobbs, who I actually like, but had maybe the worst game of his career against the Bears on Monday Night Football, throwing 3 picks for the first time. And then you also have the Seahawks, who there was the Lions game that they in part got handed because of the holding call in week 1. There was the Giant game that the Giants were in that for a while, and then Jones threw a pick 6 on the goal line. But a lot of those teams are not. I don't think any given team is actually as good as their record says. And the funny thing is, too, with the Giants, they should probably actually be 6-6 right now because they should have won that game against the Jets, and they should have won that game against the Bills. They were a yard away either time.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's the crazy thing about that scenario here. And the Giants, I mean, they dug themselves this hole. The NFC does stink, and they do have opportunities in front of them. To me, it's like, I think they lose one more game, they're done. Because I don't think you're getting in at 8-9, even how bad the NFC is.
No, I think they're done. Well, the other thing on top of that is you have to play. I think the NFC is weak. I don't think the Giants necessarily have a weak schedule because I think Green Bay is okay. New Orleans is okay. Tom Brady kind of got it right, but not in terms of the players. I think just in terms of the league is kind of in mediocre a little bit because even the Chiefs have really had their struggles. The Eagles have really had their struggles. Cincinnati, Buffalo have had their struggles. Niners have had their struggles. But the thing is with the Giants, they have to play. Even with a fairly weak schedule, they still have to play the Eagles twice. Now, week 18, it might not mean anything because the Eagles might be resting all their guys. Even then, it's still a game you're not sure if the Giants can win. But they do have to play the Eagles twice. And at this point, I think they might be better off just missing the playoffs, or at least I would have said that until this morning. But you're really in a limbo state here. You've put yourself in a limbo state with wins over Washington, with a win over New England. And Tommy DeVito actually looks good. That's the funny thing. I know they only scored 10 points against New England, but it was, a rainy day and he didn't make any mistakes. He looked good. So it's really at a point, if you're Brian Dable, do you just try to lose, or do you go for, are you Cleveland near the end of Major League when you find out that your team is supposed to tank? Let's win the whole thing.
Yeah, I think like these guys, especially in the locker rooms, they're never going to intentionally try and lose. Like they're going to try and win at all times. And I feel like Dable's already made that clear.
Yeah. Well, then the other thing is, if you're the players, you're thinking, oh, we can't lose because then if I'm on the lower end of the talent, they're just going to replace me with whoever they draft really high anyway.
Plus, if you're one of those players, like the other thing I've seen all the time in like Hard Knocks or any of these inside shows, like, hey, like, you're putting on tape for the other 31 teams in the league. So, like, if you're going out there dogging it, you might not get a job somewhere else if the Giants had to move off from you.
Yeah. Well, what's funny, too, is actually with the Giants, I know they look further away. Even the Dolphin game and the Niner game, and I said the Seahawk game, they were in it for a while. I mean, the first 3, they were in the Niner game for about 3 quarters. And it was just a matter of being unable to finish. Even the you looked at a couple of their opening drives against. Look at Dallas week one. I know they lost 40-0, but look at Dallas. Their opening drive week one, they were picking them apart, and then it just went completely downhill after the block.
Yeah, for sure. Let's go to the other side down here, the Jets, which is also the bizarre thing that you think, look at their record, that they're the team that beat the Eagles this year. They're the only team who's done it. They beat the Bills week one. They could have beaten the Chiefs in week four if they had gotten a few whistles from the referees, but now they're 4-7. They've lost 3 in a row here. The offense is historically inept here. Like, aside from the obvious Aaron Rodgers injury, what has gone wrong with this team, in your opinion?
Well, yeah, the Rodgers was the truth is I think all fans, even if you're a Pats fan, I think you're kind of disappointed in not seeing Rodgers just because it's better for the game just to see. I think it was really disappointing for people in this area. It just even I think Bill Burr was a huge Pats fan. I think he said it on Monday night I think probably on the Manning cast. He said, "Look, I was heartbroken with all of that. You want to see things like that happen." But yeah, looking at that, it's funny because Zach Wilson looked like a competent quarterback a lot of times this year. He outplayed Mahomes. He very much outplayed Mahomes, and they actually deserved to win that game. If not, it was a bad call near the end of that, and they deserved to win that game. But the funny thing is, you think of the two teams that are probably the most consistently good the last couple of years, it's the Chiefs and the Eagles. They beat the Eagles. They deserved to beat the Chiefs. They kind of got robbed. And so by that logic, theoretically, they could beat any given team. But I don't know what happened. Wilson has kind of just devolved in the last few weeks or so. The Buffalo game is just very strange. And I don't quite get it. The Miami game was not pretty to watch. I can't imagine if you were a Jet fan, but it's funny. They probably should have beaten the Raiders too. That game where Wilson threw a pick late, but they just could not convert in the red zone. I think they'd actually be just outside the playoff picture if Mike White was there. But the truth is, on top of that, the Jets probably have as bad an offensive line as the Giants do. I think the difference is the Giants are a little better off at any given quarterback spot, with the exception of Rodgers, of course. And so I don't think those guys have helped Wilson either. That's part of why they've had to lean on the run. I don't think they've committed to it enough necessarily. Breece Hall only had 7 carries last week, but I wouldn't put full blame on Wilson. I just think the last couple weeks or so, it's just gone downhill. I don't think there's a real explanation for it, though.
Yeah, I think the turning point was after that Giant game when they come off the bye, they play sloppy as hell. They're lucky to win that game. The deadline's in 2 days, and the Jets have opportunities to either bring a quarterback in to provide them insurance in case Wilson regresses, bring offensive line help. They did nothing that deadline when they could have got something in here to help. And that's sort of, I feel like, deflated that team a lot. And I feel like that's sort of taken out in their play the last few weeks.
Yeah, it's true. It's funny too. You look at Tim Boyle. I didn't think Tim Boyle played that poorly against the Dolphins. I think you're giving up, frankly, if you're putting Tim Boyle at quarterback over Wilson, considering the ceiling that Wilson has had this season. But it's funny. I remember watching the game, and you're on Prime, and they cut back to Richard Sherman at halftime, and he says, "Oh, what do you do to protect your defense? You throw a pick." And I thought, wait a minute, he threw a Hail Mary. How is that his fault? And he got it to the end zone too. I didn't think that was Tim Boyle's fault. Nobody could block coming back, and that was almost just the snake bitten Jets that you could think of on that play. That's just the worst possible thing that could happen.
Yeah, for sure here. And obviously they now have this weird storyline hovering over them that Aaron Rodgers is trying to break records, trying to return to his team, that he's trying to get cleared for practice this week with an aim towards returning on Christmas Eve against the Commanders. And it sounds like he wants to come back either way. If he gets medical clearance, the Jets seem to want to let him here. And for me, I don't think it's a good idea. I mean, the only way I would even consider it is if you somehow win 3 in a row and you're 7-7 at that point, and you have a shot to run the table and sneak in. But anything other than that, I think it's a really dumb decision. How do you feel about this?
Well, I didn't realize that Christmas Eve was the target. I mean, look, if you have Aaron Rodgers at quarterback and he's remotely healthy, I think he could probably beat Washington. If the Giants could beat Washington, the Jets could probably beat Washington. But yeah, it really depends on where they are. If they're at 7-7, I'd consider it. Because I think Rodgers with a dead calf pretty much carried the Packers to the NFC Championship game and probably should have carried them to the Super Bowl when they blew that lead with Seattle. And so I don't know. It depends where they are. I think you're probably right. They'd have to be 500. I'd have to imagine. But the other thing is, though, the only really good team I think they still play is Miami.
Yep.
And so. And remember, they beat the Eagles. should have beaten the Chiefs. They deserve to beat the Chiefs. If you put Rodgers in, then I think you got a shot at making the playoffs, but you have to put an investment in. You actually have to win a couple of games before you can get there. So if they run the table and they win 3 in a row, then yeah, why not? Why not bring in Aaron Rodgers? Go ahead. But I think you have to have some sort of different scheme on the offensive line to have a better chance of protecting him. And I think they also need to commit to the run a little more anyway, because Breece Hall had 7 carries for 25 yards last week. And considering who they've had at quarterback, you have to just run that guy 20, 25 times a game.
Yeah, I think the line is more of a product of injuries than just poor performance here. And then there's reports they might get back like 3 guys this week, and Mekhi Becton, Dwayne Brown, and Wes Schweitzer, which would be a big help. And I think the runs is a different issue in terms of like the play calling is a big problem here because they don't stretch the field enough. Everybody just stacks the box, is why I think they get tempted to try and do these other things.
Yeah, it's fun. It's funny for me because I have a soft spot for Nathaniel Hackett just because I think just watching Hard Knocks, I have that similar personality. I can't stop quoting Austin Powers.
Yeah.
But he's there for Rodgers. He's there for Rodgers, and that's why this isn't really working. He's not an incredible play caller, clearly. You look at week 1 Broncos Seahawks last year, and then he makes that decision to run down the clock just to kick a 64-yarder. I think you kind of knew from there that the Broncos had made a mistake. Now, I think Sean Payton calling him out for that publicly was a terrible mistake, but I digress here. Yeah, Rodgers coming back, you'd have to run the table. You'd have to probably win 3 in a row in order to get him back. And then you'd have to probably change the scheme the way Brian Daboll had to with Daniel Jones last season. Clearly it hasn't worked and teams have figured it out. But where Jones hadn't worked out for 3-4 years, and then it works because he has a different play scheme. The difference is, though, Jones was a younger quarterback who was not coming off a huge ACL injury, and so it's a really big risk if you do bring him back that early.
Certainly is here, and they obviously have a game this week. Giants are off; they have their bye week here. The Jets host Atlanta on Sunday, and Atlanta looks vulnerable. They do lead the weak division in the NFC. They're 5-6. They have question marks on offense. Their defense is so here. Like, what do you think has to happen for the Jets to win this football game?
Well, I think the funny thing is I was looking this up, and I know Atlanta, they do partially open. That's a great stadium. They do partially open the dome. It's almost like, the James Bond, the end of the barrel, the beginning of the movie. That's how the dome opens up at the top. But the Falcons have only won 1 game outdoors this year, like truly outdoors. And even then that was in Tampa, and that was much earlier in the season. So they're going to have to play in tougher conditions. I know Desmond Ridder, played at Cincinnati. He's a little tougher anyway, but still Atlanta's going to have to play in the cold. It's clear, low of 38, high of 47. Ritter's going to have to deal with a tough defense, and he has more picks than he has touchdowns this year. Taylor Heineke's had the job at times. Falcons fans, I think, have a little bit of unrest, and they're just a little uncertainty, the fact that he's even getting the job back. Tim Boyle threw 2 picks. 1 was his fault, and he accumulated 179 yards for the game. They were in it for a little bit. And the Jets ultimately, the truth is, the Dolphins are such a juggernaut offense. I don't know if the Dolphins are the team to beat in this league, but they're such a juggernaut offense that 27 points, you factor in the pick 6, 27 points allowed by the Jets and just under 400 yards is actually limiting them. And so I can only imagine what they do with a Falcon team that is not that strong. Kyle Pitts has been a bit disappointing. I mean, Bijan Robinson's looked pretty good, so containing the run will be huge. But I think that'll be big. And if the Jets can commit to the run, and not just give up after giving Breece Hall the ball 7 times, that will be significant. Can they commit to the run? Just run it 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 plays in a row.
Yeah, I think for me, the thing I'm watching with that game, obviously, is I think this is more like the Raider game, where it's gonna be like a very low scoring game, and like, can they make enough plays they get in the red zone to score points? I think they do that. There's a chance they win like 17-13. I think that's the margin of the Jets this week.
That might be. That might be, I think 17-13 might be over. That might be the over.
Yeah, I got to look at the number for that game, but we'll get to that in a second. We'll get to the pick. It's the reason why you're here. So Joe Delavizio was here last week. He went 1-2 in the week. Got the Browns getting 2.5 in Denver. They got blown out in that game. The Bucks getting 2.5 ending against the Colts. They lost that game at late, so got that one wrong. Got Tennessee game right at the late 3.5. They end up winning by a touchdown. They get Frank Reich fired in Carolina. So 1-2 for Joe last week.
Yeah, interesting picks there. I mean, Cleveland, they ended up losing Thompson Robinson. That was significant in the first place. It's funny with the Titans too, because Frank Reich's in his first season. I don't think it was fair that he was fired. And you look back at that too. Titans probably wanted to get him just because he coached for the Colts anyway. So that's that AFC South somewhat rivalry anyway. Even though I think Titans fans probably want them to tank a little bit at this point.
Yep. So that was Joe's week. My week, I had the 49ers laying 6.5 on Thanksgiving against the Seahawks. They blew them out and won that game. Eagles laying 3.5. I lost on the hook because they scored in overtime. Don't kick the extra point. So they only won by 3. Ravens laying 4.5. I was not going to win until the Zay Flowers touchdown, which got me this win, but I lost fantasy because of it. So 2-1 for me last week.
Yeah, I'm surprised. I'm a little surprised that Ravens Chargers game was as close as it was. It's funny, the Chargers should be so much better, and it just doesn't make sense. They lose a lot of close games, but they're behind schedule, frankly. The Niners, I might have expected them to beat Seattle. I certainly didn't think it was going to be a blowout. The Seahawks were in that game for a while, for a little bit after a really good third quarter. But yeah, the Niners just put them away. The Eagle game, the Bills frankly blew that one. I think I thought that was, and I thought the Eagles were probably going to win, especially at home. And the Bills have been so underwhelming this year for what they should be. Not to the extent the Chargers are, but the Bills have had such a higher ceiling. And we thought, Bills are going to be a Super Bowl team last year, this year, and it's just been a letdown. But yeah, the Eagles overcame tough odds for that one.
Yeah, Bills blowing games has been a trend this year.
Yeah, I mean, you got the Jet game, this game,
Denver.
Probably they should have blown the Giant game. They've been really, really disappointing this year if you're a Bills fan.
Yeah, I put money on the Bills missing the playoffs, so I feel like I feel pretty good about that because they're in their schedule ahead.
Wow, was that before the season?
That was after the Bengal game. I put it on in season.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah. All right. So to reset for the season here, I'm 21-15 on the year. The challenger team is 18-18. So we're going to go to the picks of the week here. Chris, as the guest, you can go first. So where are you going with pick number 1?
Okay, well, I think Seattle is going to cover an 8.5-point spread in Dallas. I know Dak Prescott on paper has been outstanding. I think he's benefited a ton from that defense. I think Seattle really stayed in that game with the Niners for a while. And so I think the Seahawks will be able to cover in that one. I have the Green Bay Packers covering.
Maybe a second the Seahawk one here. I do want to weigh in on that one as well, because I think the key to that game, in my opinion, the offensive line for Seattle has to hold up here, because if Geno's running for his life, they're got big problems.
Well, I mean, week 1 probably should have told you everything, because even in a shootout against Detroit, I know it's not the strongest Detroit defense, but even in a shootout in Detroit, they probably should have been, the Seahawks should have been called for holding on the touchdown that won the game in overtime, as Geno Smith just kind of scrambled out of the pocket. And so, yeah, the offensive line has been a big week.
All right, so that's pick 1. Where are you going with pick 2?
Well, I was the Green Bay Packers. I'm going to say we'll actually cover a 6.5-point spread versus Kansas City. The Chiefs have not been, the receivers have suffered. They've made Patrick Mahomes suffer, really. Marquez Valdez-Scantling, of course, with that drop against the Eagles. They got things back against the Raiders last week on the road. But, the Raiders were winning that game for a while. Green Bay, I don't think is as bad as we think. I don't think they'll win, but they've shown up at times. I think Jordan Love could be the guy of the future for the Packers.
Yeah, I like that pick too. Plus, I think also eventually have 3 extra days to get ready for that game because they play on Thanksgiving. That's going to help.
Yeah, definitely so. After a big win in Detroit, and then you play the logic game. Oh, Detroit beat Kansas City. Green Bay can beat Kansas City theoretically. But.
All right, so that's pick 2. We're going to pick 3.
I am going to say that the Miami Dolphins will actually beat a 9.5-point spread in Washington, or in Landover, to be specific. Washington has lost a few games they should won. Washington should actually be better because, you had 2 games against the Giants and you should be better than the Giants. And then they also lost the 2 games to the Eagles that it looked like they should have won both of those games. But you look at Sam Howell's stats as well, and I mean, yeah, he leads the league in yards. He's also the most sacked quarterback in the league. This team has traded away at least half its defensive line that was supposed to be one of the best in the league. Jack Del Rio gets fired and when he had to suffer with, no Chase Young. And so I think the Dolphins will be able to pick them apart this week.
Yeah, I like that pick too, because I mean, I feel like, as you said, Del Rio's fired. They kind of stink. It's a mess here in Washington. And Miami also extra rest. The rest is about the same. They've one played on Thursday, one played on Friday. So it's not even close.
Yeah. And, offensively, the Dolphins didn't have to struggle that much either when considering they had to play against the Jets. So.
All right. So that's your picks on the board. I'm up now. Your pick number one. I'm going to go to the game of the week here. I know people are surprised the 49ers are favored on the road, laying 2.5 against the Eagles. I'm going to take them here. I think they're in a better spot to win this game. I think Philly's been teetering for a little bit. They've had some close calls of late. San Francisco peaking right now. They're playing very well. They had 3 extra days to get ready for this game. And this is a big revenge factor here. I rightfully feel like they could have won last year in the conference championship game if they didn't have both their quarterbacks get hurt. Now they're healthy. They'll be ready to go. I think they're going to go out there and they're going to beat the Eagles and make a statement. So I'm going to take the 49ers, pick one.
I agree with you there. My Super Bowl pick was Chiefs over Niners. At the beginning of the year, I think that if the Niners have a quarterback, I think they're definitely a better team than the Eagles. Jalen Hurts has turned the ball over a lot of times. The Eagles actually have a negative turnover differential, which is wild to think, and they're not as high in a lot of metrics as you might expect. I know the Niners suffered for a little bit, that 3-game losing streak, but yeah, if the Niners have a starting quarterback, I don't think it matters whether it's in Santa Clara or it's in Philly at the Link. I think the Niners are the better team.
All right, that's pick number one here. Pick two, I'm picking the Lions at bounce back spot, laying 4 in New Orleans against the Saints. I don't think New Orleans is very good. They couldn't beat Atlanta last week. And Detroit's going to be stewing in that Thanksgiving loss for a while now. 3 extra days to get ready for the Saints. I think this is a prime, we're angry, we're going to take it out in New Orleans spot. If they win by at least a touchdown, I'll lay the 4 with the Lions.
Yeah, I think I was considering that game for a second, actually. I think that is the key, the last thing you said about the Lions being mad about the Packer loss. They should be very frustrated after losing to a team like that. I don't think Green Bay is that bad, but losing to the Packers at home in probably the most anticipated Thanksgiving game for the Lions in a decade, maybe, at least, I don't know, definitely since Matt Stafford was a quarterback for them. But yeah, dropping that game on national television, that's going to be very frustrating for them, and they can really make a statement against the Saints this week.
All right, that's pick two. Pick number 3, I'm going to the Denver-Houston. I think the Broncos getting 3.5 in Houston against the Texans here. I think Texans have played very well. They've been a big surprise here. They're now dealing with the pressure of a playoff run here. And I think the Broncos playing well. They have a better defense than Houston does. They have elite corners. It's going to be very tough for CJ Stroud to throw out here. I'm getting the half-point hook here. I think it's a field goal game either way. I'll take the extra half point. I think Denver is a great shot to win it outright, too. I'm going to take the Broncos on the road, pick 3.
Well, yeah, we've said for the last 2, 3, 4 years that the Broncos have been a team that are a quarterback away. I think they're starting to figure things out a little bit with Wilson. Even the Dolphin game, I don't think he played poorly, and it's just a strange afternoon for that defense. Houston, yeah, CJ Stroud threw 3 picks against the Cardinals. They still survived. But then on top of that, it was like a 1-score game, I think. The Cardinals are, at least on paper, pretty bad, but also they kind of remind me of the Lions from 2 years ago, where they were not winning many games, but they were just in every game. And so I give them a ton of credit for that, even after trading Dobbs and going to a more aggressive team with Murray. But yeah, I think Stroud and the Texans are a little more vulnerable. I think the Broncos do have a stronger defense, and they do have a little bit more of a veteran pedigree.
Yeah, plus, I mean, after they got a little deflate after missing that kick, Jacksonville would have tied the game into overtime last week.
Yeah, a tough one there for Houston, where you think, we had Jacksonville on the ropes. We could have gotten right back in this division race, but that's forgive me, 2 weeks ago was the Kyler Murray, the Cardinal game. But yeah, dropping the one to Jacksonville was a tough one for the Texans because it kind of puts them back in a wild card range.
Yep. So reset the picks of the week here. Chris is taking the Seahawks getting 8.5 on Thursday against the Cowboys. The Packers getting 6.5 at home on Sunday Night Football against the Kansas City Chiefs. The Dolphins laying 9.5 in Washington against the Commanders. My picks, I think the game of the week, the 49ers laying 2.5 in Philly against the Eagles. The Lions laying 4 in New Orleans. And the Broncos getting 3.5 against the Houston Texans. Those are your picks here for week number 13. And coming up next week on the podcast, I'm going to be joined by my friend Phil Frey. We're going to talk some more Giant football as they get ready for this big game against the Packers.
Yeah, Monday Night Football. It should be an interesting one. Two teams that are still in the thick of things. Packers will be really excited too because they're only a game out now of, or maybe a half game out of the Vikings of all teams.
Yeah, for sure. And I think of those teams on the outside of the NFC playoff picture right now, I think Green Bay probably has the best chance to sneak in there.
Yeah, I think Jordan Love is a lot more capable than we realized. It's taking a little time for that team to mature, but they are not as far away as you might think.
Yeah, I don't think so either, Chris. Thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it. People want to follow you on social media, keep up with your podcast. Not going to do that.
Yeah, you can just follow me. Facebook is one, but X, or Twitter, however you want to call it, or Instagram at Chris Russo 98. You can find me on there. You can find the podcast on there. We're trying to, not ashamed to say, we're trying to monetize. We need a certain amount of listeners on Spotify in order to get there. But yeah, we've been upping things a little bit as of late. A couple of weeks ago, I actually had my friend Dalton Allison, who was my sports director at WSOU, but back at Seton Hall. He was my roommate there, one of my really good friends, and first time we've really done a significant interview on the podcast. And he also works now in more of the community relations sector, working with the Lustgarten Foundation. So that was something that I really enjoyed doing.